1, 2, 3, 4.
Da, di, gi, na, dum, 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 da, di, gi, na, dum.
Hello, my name is David Bruce. So M&M, extreme math nerd music, is a genre which doesn't exist. I just made it up. But if it did exist, the music we'll look at today would definitely be a prime candidate. And no, I'm afraid, unfortunately, I didn't make that opening. That was just a cunning bit of split-screen technology.
Da, di, gi, na, dum, 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 da, di, gi, na, dum.
I reckon with maybe a day or two of practice, I might have mastered that section. But that's only the first part of this incredibly complex rhythmic composition by B.C. Manjunath and Varajashri Venugopal, where the rhythms seem to speed up and slow down in opposite directions at the same time. It's clearly a virtuosic display of rhythmic ingenuity, and I got really obsessed with it for a few days, trying to work out what was going on, how it was constructed. So much so, in fact, that I incorporated some of the things I found into a short piece I'd been asked to write for my friends at Cromer earlier this year. So I'll talk first a little bit more about the rhythms you can hear the two performers playing in this piece, and then we'll look a bit more at the tradition it comes from, the South Indian tradition of Carnatic music, and more specifically the art of performing percussion syllables vocally, known as Konnakol. So I'm not going to talk too much about the details of how to actually perform Konnakol. I'll mostly talk about the unique way it's organised and the ways it can give us new ideas and ways of understanding music. Konnakol has become increasingly popular outside of India in recent years. And in fact, quite a lot of what we'll talk about relates to the concepts we looked at in the video I did on Tigran Hamasyan, because we're dealing here with things like long rhythmic cycles and also complex polyrhythms. One of the first and most influential figures to discuss Konnakol in the West was guitarist John McLaughlin, whose Mahavishnu Orchestra was one of the pioneers of world music fusion. That group was influenced a lot by Konnakol, as was his later group SCHNEE, which, if you don't know, I really recommend you check out because they produced some really amazing music. But the techniques have also been used by progressive metal bands like Meshuggah, and if you want a sense of how Konnakol overlaps with metal, check out this really entertaining video from Mattias Eklundh, where he power chords through some of the rhythmic patterns of Konnakol.
That would be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay? And now we do this with the same chord. We use B flat to make it even more evil.
And my friend Yogev Gabai, who featured in my Bach Partita arrangement, is a fan of both Konnakol and Meshuggah, and in fact recently teamed up with B.C. Manjunath to do a Konnakol cover of Meshuggah's Nostrum. So all of these things end up connected all together. So if we go back to that opening piece, I worked out, with a bit of help from the YouTube description and just by listening through to it a few times, there's a really intriguing mathematical game that's going on. Well, several games in fact. So the underlying cycle at play here is a pattern of 1-4 plus 1/16, 2-4 plus 2/16, 3-4 plus
3/16, 4-4 plus 4/16, and 5-4 plus 5/16.
So it's dum da dum dum da da dum 2 3 da 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 dum 2 3 4 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1. Another way we can think of this is 5/16 notes followed by 10, 15, 20, and then 25. So that's the background cycle. So you end up with this pattern which is 75 16th notes long, and you can follow this along as they clap in the video.
Da, di, gi, na, dum, 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 da, di, gi, na, dum.
But this is where the real math starts to come into play, because over the top of that you hear Varajashri Venugopal singing evenly spaced notes in groups of 5 notes, which effectively go the opposite way to the time signature. So first we have 5 lots of 5, so 25 16th notes.
da, di, gi, na, dum.
And then 4 lots of 5, so 20 16 notes, and so on, matching the pattern of the time signature but in reverse. So at the end of the cycle, everything lands together back on the 1.
Da, di, gi, na, dum. 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 Da, di, gi, na, dum.
But if that wasn't enough, then they perform various other mathematical tricks over that. First, they double the length of the whole thing, so it takes 2 full cycles for the melody to complete. Oh, and they perform it by interlocking, alternating notes.
Da,
Da,
di,
di,
gi,
gi,
na,
na,
dum.
dum. Da,
Di,
di,
gi,
gi,
na,
na,
dum.
dum.
Da,
Da,
di,
di,
gi,
gi,
na,
na,
dum.
dum.
And then one claps the background rhythm of the thala backwards against the other one, and so on. In the final section, I didn't fully work out what happens, but it incorporates the concept I mentioned in the Tigran Hamasyan video of the T-high, which is that pattern that repeats 3 times so that the last part of the last pattern hits the downbeat. And you can interlock groups of 3 so that it becomes mathematically even more complex, but they always end up landing on that last downbeat. So having previously done a video about spirals, I felt like this was a good example of a spiral rhythm because the singing part speeds up each time round and ends up in that sort of dot on the 1 before opening out and starting a new spiral. So I found a rather lovely word, kundali, which is the Hindi for spiral, and some of these rhythms became the basis for my piece with that title. In fact, the title here isn't really appropriate because Hindi is spoken mainly in the north of India, whereas Konnakkol is a southern Indian tradition.
Konnakkol kind of fits into the larger framework of Carnatic music, which is the South Indian classical tradition of music in India, and it's a centuries-old tradition, often believed to have actually been one musical tradition that existed kind of throughout India, and then it's a big country, so there are some influences from the Middle East and other places, and so it kind of ended up splitting largely into a North Indian classical, which is Hindustani, and South Indian classical, which is Carnatic. As far as I know, their spoken tradition is much more structured in that every syllable pretty much corresponds to actually a stroke on the instrument.
Right, yeah.
So it's almost like when you learn the composition, you're memorizing it, and then it's telling you, fingering, dynamics. I mean, it's really all of that. That is just an oral tradition kind of thing. So it was structured largely so that you can teach it without having to write it down, and really the student will understand all aspects of the composition and how to play it. It's like spoken notation. But in the Carnatic tradition, with Konnakol and all that, it kind of developed in its own way to be spoken. So there's a lot of syllables that don't necessarily correspond to a stroke on the instrument, or that can be interpreted. But really, it was designed for ease of speaking at fast speeds.
And yes, when he says fast speeds, they can be very fast. The traditional approach to Konnakol has 35 main cycles or talas. And let's look at a common one with 8 beats known as the Adi tala.
The most common talam in South Indian classical music, Carnatic music, is a short form called Adi talam. And it's essentially 8/4, but it's broken up into 4, 2, and 2. So it would be put as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
But then Konnakol also specifies the number of divisions within each of these main beats. These are called gati, and there are 5 phrases that correspond to the 3, 4, 5, 7 and 9 divisions of the beat. Takita, takadimi, takatakita, takita takadimi, and takadimi takatakita. And what's really useful about this is that in any number of contexts it allows you to specify quickly and precisely not just the number of beats but also the way they're subdivided.
It's helpful because every possible combination of beats not only has an intuitive way of speaking it, but potentially, depending on how long it is, different ways to break that into smaller sections. So you could take a 5 and say "ta dingir natong," which is kind of one big 5, or you could say "taka taketa," which is 2, 3, or "taketa taka," or "tataka dimi," 1, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So where a Western musician might be struggling to describe the division of a quintuplet by, say, accenting the 2nd 16th note, the Konnakkol musician has a really quick and precise spoken notation, as Rohith calls it, which I think many of us could find useful in our day-to-day lives.
But even at Berklee, there are so many teachers who teach, in ear training and stuff, when they teach you groupings and rhythms, they'll use syllables from the Indian tradition because they were designed to be spoken.
So that's definitely one aspect of Konnakkol which offers a new perspective on how to think about music. But if we're being honest, what probably gets people most excited about Konnakkol is the way it handles polyrhythms. Let's start with our Adi talam and use the 3-note gati which corresponds to a triplet. Takita 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 ta. But now let's change the spoken phrase to a 4-note phrase, takadimi. So the syllables are still going to stay at the same speed and we'll still clap every 3rd syllable just as before, but we'll end up now with that 4-note phrase on top of the 3-note beat. Takadimi, 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 ta. I have to say, adding in those clapping movements which are part of Konnakkol makes the whole thing a lot harder. You're not just doing a straight polyrhythm, your brain really has to be thinking of 3 things at once, not just 2. And of course you can practice any mixture of numbers in both the gati and the phrase. So you could keep the gati in 3s, the triplets, and change the phrase to 5s. Taka takita taka takita taka takita taka takita ta. Or to 7s. Takita takadimi takita takadimi takita takadimi ta. Or you could change the gati to 4s, the equivalent of 16th notes, and now sing, say, a 3-syllable phrase. Takita 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 ta. If you want to push it even further, you could do 5-note gatis with a 7-syllable phrase, effectively a 5 against 7 polyrhythm. Takita takadimi takita takadimi takita takadimi takita takadimi takita takadimi da. Damn, sorry, I used the split screen again. I just can't help it. Takita takadimi 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 da. The other way that advanced rhythms can happen in Konnakkol is through the use of what we might otherwise know as metric modulation. I'll avoid the temptation of a split screen this time, so here's a phrase that can be played over a pulse. Ta ta keta takatina, katina. Geta ta ta geta taka geta ta ta. Now we'll keep the pulse the same, but play it a 3rd faster. Ta ta geta takatina katina geta ta ta geta taka geta ta ta. And then a 3rd faster again. Ta ta geta takatina katina geta ta ta geta taka geta ta ta. So this is another technique that's often used in Konnakkol. And one final idea I'd like to focus on is an idea known as Yati. Yati are expanding or decreasing syllabic patterns that, when you write them out, create a kind of geometric shape.
Kind of 6 main ones. So you could have a composition that increases, or you could have a composition that's like a reduction. You could have one that increases and then reduces, or reduces and then increases.
In terms of what?
So in terms of beats. So if you were to do like 6, 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
That would be one of these shapes. And then there's one that's called Vishamayati, which basically just means like do whatever you want. So there's a joke that I have with another percussionist, which is that like everything we do is that.
So here's Mridanga Yati, for example, which, as you can see, starts with one syllable and then expands one syllable at a time until it's 5 syllables and then contracts back down to 1 syllable again. And this was a concept that influenced Philip Glass, who transferred this approach into his melodic writing. So instead of the rhythm, it was the melodic phrase that contracts and expands. C, D, E, F, G becomes C, D, E, F, C, D, E, C, D, C, and then back out again. John McLaughlin also talks about how he uses the rhythms of Konnakol to generate melody.
The other side of Konnakol, once it becomes integrated into your way of thinking, is I believe it's a tremendous source for melodic inspiration. 9, 10, 11, 12. Da, ki, da, da, ki, da. And even ended on triplets. 7, 12. So you see, by just adapting different rhythmical motives and assigning notes to them, I mean, of course you have to hear the melodic side of it, you'll find it a real source of musical inspiration.
So overall, geometric shapes, polyrhythms, metric modulations, and above all, finding ways for all of these to fit together into a structure really requires a lot of mathematics and a lot of pre-planning. You can see how Konnakkol appeals to the nerdier musicians amongst us. And in fact, even in India, the perceived nerdiness can sometimes be a problem.
Traditional Carnatic structure, concert structure, has like, a series of pieces that will sort of build, adding sort of elements of improvisation as you go through the concert into like a main piece that's kind of the central piece of the concert. And that piece is usually like maybe an hour long, could be. It's typically a long composition itself. The composition might be 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes, just singing the song through, along with an open improvisation before from a vocalist and a violinist. Then there's, solfege trades that'll happen melodically, lyrical things that'll happen. And then after that, the percussionist will take a solo in whatever talam time signature that song is in. And that's kind of where they get their moment to math out on everyone. And if they're lucky, the main composition won't be in 8 or 16 or something. It'll be maybe in 11 or something like that. But that's kind of their moment to kind of shine.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's also the moment when people tend to leave the concert for a snack or a tea. It's actually a joke within the Carnatic world that like, the Tanya Vartanam, which is the percussion solo, is going to start. Time to hit the bathroom or grab a samosa before you come back for the rest of the concert. There's some
not on my channel.
Vocal about it.
But nerdy or not, I personally find Konnakkol really exciting and rewarding to listen to. The tension mounts as the complexity builds, but then there's always this release on the one of the cycle. And this centering everything so that it arrives back on the one is what makes the mathematics of Konnakkol so extreme. Working out where to start if you're going to play something that goes to triple speed and then triple speed again requires some proper math skills. But what do you think? Geek heaven or geek hell? If you can think of any other musical examples that ought to belong in our new M&M category, do let me know in the comments. So you saw I was forced to resort to split screens to record just that opening section of B.C. Manjunath's piece. And I know many of you who follow Adam Neely's channel enjoyed doing his 7/11 polyrhythms challenge. So let's do a similar one and see how many of you managed to get that opening section nailed. If you tag your efforts with David Bruce Composer over at Instagram, I'll look forward to seeing how you get on. A special thank you to Rohith Jayaraman for talking to me more about Konnakkol, and thank you as ever to my wonderful patrons over at Patreon. Do head over there if you'd like to support the channel and help me keep making these videos. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. And don't forget to check out my new album of chamber music, The North Wind Was a Woman, which you can stream or download or buy, whatever you prefer. And if you haven't already, do like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ta ti ki na tom, 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 ta ti ki na tom.